Hello there. The consequences of Brexit and the government chaos under Truss. The Conservatives are burying their prescriptions and even want to raise taxes for higher earners now. If the thesis is correct that Great Britain is showing where the inflationary journey is also heading in the Eurozone, then the development on the island will be a new drumbeat for us here on the continent too. We are not suffering from such an inflation rate like there, but still. Even before the new British Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, was able to present his bailout plan for the economy, the State Office for National Statistics, the ONS, had announced that official inflation in Great Britain has now risen sharply to 11.1%. This is the biggest rise in inflation in 41 years, and this means that official inflation has risen again by a full percentage point. The increase is significantly higher than economists surveyed by the financial information service Reuters had expected. They had forecast an increase to 10.7%. Great Britain therefore also has an inflation rate that, like in the Eurozone, only knows one direction, and that's upwards, although in Germany went downwards in between. It was the Bank of England that was the first G7 country to initiate an interest rate turnaround relatively early on a year ago. Despite everything, as in the euro area, it's still completely out of control in the UK. And it didn't help that the BOE also raised the key interest rate for the first time by an aggressive 75 basis points to 3% at the beginning of the month. This step came far too late because in Great Britain, as in the euro area, the difference in interest rates is causing a weak currency. Since energy is traded in US dollars on the world market, this leads to higher energy prices, even if they do not rise at all. For example, the price of oil fell by 5% over the past month. Because of the weak pound, however, this does not have an inflation dampening effect there. A perfect storm is brewing for the kingdom, also because of the consequences of Brexit and the government chaos there. Some media had previously reported that Britain is facing a recession of the country, and you heard it here on my channel as well. Economic output contracted unexpectedly early in August. It was suspected that the UK slipped into recession in the third quarter, and that even earlier than expected. There were warnings that economic output could fall for more than 8 straight quarters, and that would be the longest recession since reliable records began 100 years ago. The Office of Budget Responsibility, or OBR, has now confirmed that things are likely to get worse for the British. The OBR is a kind of audit office. Although the office was set up by the government, it is independent and analyzes the economic situation in the country. It has now presented concrete figures on how deep the crisis will actually go, and these figures have, quite shocked many people. According to the OBR, the country is already in recession, so now you have dangerous stagflation on the island. It's also noted that without measures to curb energy prices, inflation would have been 2.5 percentage points higher. That means almost 15%. In the so-called autumn statement, however, the OBR only assumes that the economy will only shrink moderately. At 1.4%, it is expected to shrink somewhat more sharply in the coming year than in the current year. A growing economy is predicted for 2024, but in view of the rising prices, real wages should be eroded. A more optimistic forecast predicts a reduction in the standard of living by a total of 7% in the 2 budget years up to 2023-24, and that would be a record, wiping out the growth of the previous 8 years. The relative optimism of the OBR is based, among other things, on the fact that the Court of Auditors assumes that inflation will also return to normal. Inflation will sharply fall over the next year, writes the OBR. They assume that the inflation rate will even be pushed below zero again in the middle of the decade due to falling energy and food prices. That means a phase of deflation will occur before it reaches the target of 2% again in 2027, which the BOE has also set itself. The optimism is also fed by the fact that unemployment is only expected to rise moderately, although you can never really say something about the unemployment because of the zero-hour contracts. They are expecting the unemployment on their statistics to rise from 1.2 to 1.7 million in 24. But while that was also a bleak backdrop, the OBR is forecasting a less bleak scenario than the central bank, which had seen the country in a very challenging situation. Either the principle of hope applies in the Court of Auditors, or the main aim is to prevent employees from making high wage demands in collective bargaining disputes in order to compensate for the massive loss of purchasing power, with the predictions that inflation will soon fall again quickly, which I do not believe. The British statisticians have already noticed a significantly increased willingness to strike. The statistics agency ONS has calculated that more than 560,000 working days were lost to strikes in August and September alone, and this is the highest value in 10 years. Significantly rising wages could, however, lead to second-round effects if companies pass the rise in wages costs onto the prices again, and this could lead to what economists like to describe as a dangerous wage price spiral. However, studies have long shown that the inflation driven by the oil price shock in the 1970s did not cause lasting damage to the economy during stagflation, but rather that it was actually stabilized by increased purchasing power. It therefore depends on whether companies are trying to maintain their earning expectations in the short term, or whether they want to lower them for more sustainable stabilization. If inflation were to stabilize because increased wages costs were quickly reflected in higher prices, then a sustained interest rate shock can be expected, of which even the United States of America are already warning. Because it's clear that the Bank of England will continue to raise interest rates in the face of record inflation. And in addition, money is being pulled out of consumers' pockets because, among other things, interest rates on mortgage loans are rising. Because, as in Spain, there's also the bad habit in Great Britain that mortgage loans are often granted for short periods at variable interest rates. About two-thirds of all mortgage loans in the UK have variable interest rates. The risk of an interest rate shock is therefore significantly higher in Great Britain than in the United States, although the US Federal Reserve has already increased the key interest rate to a range of 3.75 to 4%. This has to do with an interesting development in the United States since the 2008 financial crisis. The structure of the US mortgage market is now more fixed interest. The proportion of loans with variable interest rates has halved since then. In economies like the UK, with a higher proportion of variable rate mortgages, interest rate levels therefore have a great impact on the economy. Unlike in the UK, the Fed has managed to significantly lower the inflation rate again with its aggressive interest rate policy. So far, at least, this has not been done at the expense of the economy. The economy in the United States has even grown again recently. According to an initial estimate, economic output increased again by 2.6% in the third quarter. Technically, the United States was also in recession, as the economy had contracted in the first and also in the second quarter. But let's get back to Great Britain. There, after the neoliberal excesses of the short-term head of government Liz Truss, her conservative Tories are making a U-turn in tax policy. Truss had almost thrown the country into chaos with her absurd tax plans, which even led to a massive outcry on the financial markets, with the consequences of that. Instead of lowering taxes as usual, especially for higher earners, as Truss wanted to follow in the footsteps of former US President Donald Trump, the government under Rishi Sunak now has exactly the opposite in mind. Truss wanted to lower the top tax rate from 45 to 40%. Under her reign, high earners with earnings over £150,000 should pay significantly less tax. Well, Treasury Secretary Hunt announced when he unveiled his bailout plan for the economy that even income above £125,000 would be subject to the top tax rate. That is still 45%. For him, it's about nothing less than saving the local economy. Since the amount of the tax allowance is also to be frozen for 2 more years until 2028, Significantly more people are slipping into the area of the highest tax rate as a result of rising wages. And regarding high inflation, Hunt said, we cannot have long-term sustainable growth with high inflation. Fighting inflation should be given the highest priority. With his rescue plan, he wants to save a total of £55 billion in order to consolidate public finances. And this also requires tax increases. We are honest about the challenges and fair about our solutions, is what Hunt said in Parliament. He wants to try to square the circle and with his plan reduce debt, ensure stability, lower inflation, and at the same time protect the most vulnerable. According to his plans, those in Great Britain should finally pay more taxes that they can pay. In addition to the higher income taxes, the finance minister also announced that the windfall tax or the excess profit tax for oil and gas companies will be increased from 25% to 35%, which is still not happening really here in Germany, by the way. The tax has also been extended to 2028. And a new tax of 45% for electricity producers is also to be introduced. It should also only be introduced temporarily. It is still largely unclear where exactly savings are to be made. In any case, this should not happen in the ailing health service. Hunt even announced higher spending here as well as for education. Although the line with a high inflation should rise, but low-income earners should accept further losses in real wages. The minimum wage is set to increase by just under 10% to £10.42 an hour. And we will talk about this topic for a long time to come. I'm sorry, but that's true. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.